An old dilapidated wooden house with primitive and very dark and poor surroundings. I got a letter from my dad saying that he wanted to see me in person before he departed this world. That letter was very upsetting. I had not seen or heard from Daddy for almost 5 years, and this request was the last thing that I expected. The next day, I booked a flight to go to the island of Antigua. I remembered vaguely where he lived, for I had left Antigua since I was 12 years old, so I was prepared to make inquiries about directions. I reached the island at dusk time and reached my father's home in about 15 minutes. It was confirmed by a neighbor that I was standing to the front of the correct house. Although I did not know what to expect, I was disappointed about the conditions that surrounded me. Instantly, I felt sorry for my dad, who endured these conditions and never wrote a letter of complaint to me, his only daughter. The house was in complete darkness. There was not a sound. It was as if no one inhabited this dark, primitive, and dilapidated house, yet all of the windows were opened. As I moved closer, my shoes stirred up some gravel, and as I stepped on what sounded like a dry tree branch that had fallen, I heard a faint groan coming from inside the dark box. I shouted, "Dad!" and quickened my steps. "Deborah?" he replied. His voice was weak and shaky. When I got into the house, I tried to feel my way around. I could not find him. I asked him if he was feeling healthy or if he was ill. He told me that he was ill and gave me directions to the kitchen and where to find matches and candles. After I lit the candles, I realized that my dad's house was in a worse condition than I initially perceived. The house was in a rotten state, and there were buckets placed in specific positions in the house to collect rain from the leaking roof. There were no indoor toilet and bathroom facilities, and many of the floorboards were missing. I felt a burning inside as I looked down at my dad sitting in a bottomless chair in which he had placed a piece of galvanized in the seat. My cheeks became wet, and I tasted the salt of the tears that sprung from my itching eyes. I walked over to my father and hugged him. He was barely able to reciprocate the intensity of my squeeze. After sitting and chatting with Daddy for about 15 minutes, he indicated that he wanted to relieve himself in the toilet. I took one of the lighted candles and patiently took Dad by the arm and walked him through the backyard and into the toilet that was built before I was born. It was a galvanized structure with a concrete floor. When he had finished, I took him back to the house. I tried to persuade my father to come and live with me and allow me to take care of his health. But he was so stubborn about the idea that I had to give up. I promised him to repair the house and get some home help to visit him and take care of him. An old, dilapidated wooden house with primitive and very dark and poor surroundings.